Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the 2023 Alberta election post-mortem. What went well, what went wrong, and what the fuck happened? Well, what went well is the protection and the forecasts were pretty close. If we go over to this view, we can see here. This is me comparing the popular vote percentages. I had about a 93% seat accuracy rate if we look at the scenario 1 prediction. And to be clear, this is what the scenario 1 prediction is. This is about 93% accurate. There's a couple seats wrong. That guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, and this guy, and that guy. 7 seats. 8887 ridings, not too bad. But this is popular vote. Now, to be clear, mean squared error means you take the difference between these two errors and square them. And then you add all of these up, and then you divide it by this number. This is 6, so if you divide it by 6. That is basically the mean error you are different. It's squared, so the further off you are, the more it matters. Being off by 0.1 here is less important than being off by 1 or 0.9 over here. The marginal difference, that is. So going from accurate to 0.1 off versus going from 0.9 to 1, it's a bigger difference. So what do we have here? So scenario 1 is this guy. Scenario 2 is this guy. You remember those. Average is if you just take those two scenarios, and if you do recall in my previous videos early on in the series when I rolled out scenario 1 and scenario 2, I said the real answer could be between these two, but I'm not going to do it because this is the bounds. And if you look at these two scenarios, that is mostly true. Now, there's a couple seats off in Calgary that I missed either scenario, but outside of Calgary, everything else is within bounds, seat-wise. Great. So who else we have? We have too close to call. Oh, and raw here is if I do no polling error correction. And once again, if I do no polling error correction, despite what everyone, or not everyone, I should say, many critics might say that, oh, you're putting your thumb on the scale, Bagel, or how dare you want to be changing the numbers. Turns out, if you didn't do that, it made it worse. Told you so. We have too close to call here, we have 338 Canada, and we have Canada polling. Another person who does this on Twitter. Decent size. Gerald, overall, does a good job. So what do we have here? What are these stars? Well, if you note here, the star indicates that this model did not forecast this party. So in other words, 338 did not forecast other right or the Alberta Libs. They are all rolled into other, and they are calculated accordingly. So for 338 and Canada polling, they actually only take the difference between these ones, and other is this minus that squared. Divided by, everything is divided by 4, obviously. And we get these errors. Now, just as a rule of thumb, if you get less than 1 mean squared error, fantastic. You're doing amazing. The marginal difference between 338's 0.93 and too close to call's 0.92 is kind of irrelevant. You get between 1 and 3, that's good, very good, that's solid. 3 and 5, doing okay. If you're going to smaller subsamples like regionals here, that's more acceptable. 5 to 9, not doing great, and 10 plus is pretty bad. And you, God forbid, get 100 plus, that's just awful. You did a terrible job. So, in the sub-regionals, we can see here, in Calgary, this is CMA. I will just make this a bit clearer. CMA. And this is also CMA. I don't have 338 for these because I just didn't bother wanting to sum up all of his writings. That was too much effort. He did a good job, more or less. Like, you actually look at his seat projections, he got pretty close on seats. I think he's only had like 3 or 4 off. Maybe 5. I think it was 5. So he was pretty good on seats, so his popular votes by regions weren't that far off. And as you can see here, once again, the raw model is bad. That's to be expected. That's why I don't use it. But otherwise, everyone did pretty good, except in the rest of Alberta, where there was a lot of polling error. As you can see, everybody, including my best case scenario, more or less, for the UCP was wrong. Overestimated the NDP, underestimated the UCP. So the rest of Alberta is more of a polling error than anything else. But that's expected because the rolls are always mispolled. And that's not to say the pollsters themselves are bad or they're not good at their job or whatever. It's just very difficult to poll rural areas. The marginal response rate is very low. And, well, that's basically the story. The marginal response rate is very low. And if you look at university educated or urbanites, those marginal response rates are much higher. So oftentimes, even your rural sample might be skewed towards urban centers in rural parts, such as Lethbridge or Red Deer, which is going to further skew your numbers versus ridings such as Brooks Medicine Hat, which is going to be more rural than, say, Red Deer. But overall, not too bad. This really doesn't affect too much, as you saw here. My scenario 1, which I think is the least favorable one that we actually have a map for. What this meant really was just one seat, Lethbridge East, erroneously went NDP. Now, realistically, if I were to take this and I were to have this as that, use these popular vote numbers, Banff Kanaskas would have also went UCP, so I would have been wrong overcorrection there. But it is what it is. So overall, all these aggregators that I have here compared against, doing well. If we look at my average scenario, I did splendidly everywhere. Except possibly, even the rest of Alberta did splendidly. So I will say this as a solid win. My seat projection accuracies went up. 93% is pretty good for me. I've never really been that great at seat projection accuracy. Is it 93%? Whatever 80 divided by 87 is, that's what the number is. Let's see. 92%, sorry. 92% is pretty good for me. I've never been that good at this. Sorry. I'm going to make a correction there. Seat accuracy has not been what I'm good at. I'm good at popular vote. That's my main specialty. Which is weird. I don't know why I'm better at popular vote, but I am. That's where we are. So this is the final map we have here. So what really happened? What are we seeing? Well, Alberta's going with a trend we're seeing everywhere else. And this election is an example of this trend we are seeing everywhere else. And we shouldn't be surprised because this is a trend we are seeing everywhere. The rurals are getting more conservative. The urbans are getting more lefty, if you will. And the suburbs are up for grabs. That's the gist of it. You have some outliers like Lethbridge West here and Banff Kanaskas. But for the most part, this remains true. In this particular election, quite interestingly enough, the NDP was overpolled in the rurals, but their Calgary numbers, while not underpolled, I think were underestimated in their efficiency. The vote efficiency the NDP have is much higher than expected. But it's also not a vote efficiency I really see growing much more. 6 of these ridings, these 3 here and these 3 here, are razor thin margins. And yes, you can look at some other ridings on my DCP, which I believe there's about 6, which are razor thin margins. And some people in the discourse in the news media and Twitter and all these other places where people talk about elections and stuff were like, oh, we were 3,000 votes from an NDP government. Yeah, kill yourself. That's stupid. That's so dumb. Anyone sitting down and being like, if we just flipped these number of votes, that would mean the election different. When you're talking about an urban area like Calgary, because all of these marginal seats are in Calgary, That's just crazy. It really doesn't work like that. It sort of, kind of, barely works on the US presidential level when you're talking about states. Because the election in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, if we look at 2022, which would have been enough for Trump to win, the election in those 3 states is disjoint enough that you can honestly say, yes, you could have won by just, I think it's like 100,000 votes or something like that is the total. You can say that. Apologies, my neighbor is very loud with his truck. I'm not sure if you heard that. But in a city like Calgary, that's nonsensical. All of these ridings are extremely correlated. And the odds that in any heavily correlated area where you have a lot of toss-ups, that you would see all the toss-ups break in the same direction is incredibly low. And all of the toss-ups, all 12 of these toss-up seats have to break NDP for an NDP win to happen. And that's incredibly unlikely. Especially when, with recounting, these Calgary Acadia and Calgary Glenmore are like 100 votes or something like that. A couple of these ones are like 200 or 300. What is more likely is if the NDP were to win the election in a path they were to win, it wouldn't be just sneaking through these 6 seats with 2,000 votes. It would in reality be 100,000 odd or maybe 50,000 odd votes across the entire province going NDP. And by nature of this, it would be more concentrated in Calgary itself because, well, let's face it, Edmonton is pretty near their cap. So, what? Why? Why was NDP's vote so much better than anticipated? Why did my model miss that? Well, I think in some places, such as Calgary Acadia, it might be individual MP effects changing the result, demotivating Conservative turnout, possibly motivating NDP turnout. But the main gist here, and the main thing that seems to have happened, overwhelmingly, is all the third-party voters in 2019 broke NDP. If we look at, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. We look at this. We look at these headlines here. 53, 44, 78,000, 926,000. Okay. We go back to 2019. The UCP only lost about 100,000 voters. Okay. If we go down by results itself, we can kind of get a better feel here. So the UCP lost about 114,000 voters. And you could naively say that those 114,000 voters, apologies, I overdone. Oh, that was awkward. Here we go. Sorry about that. Those 114,000 voters from 2019 could have broken NDP. I think that's extremely unlikely. Maybe some of them did. I'm not going to say 0 of them did. I'm sure if you canvassed enough Albertans, you will find some who voted Jason Kenney and then voted NDP. That almost certainly happened. But what seems much more likely is you look at places like the Alberta Party. They only got 13,000 votes. They got 172,000 in 2019. And you look at some of these other parties, like the Liberals. They got 19,000 votes, and now they're down to 4,000 votes. What seems extremely likely to me, looking at this map, and looking at where down here, such as Calgary Elbow, where there was a very strong Alberta Party performance, is a lot of Alberta Party voters, probably most of them, who stopped voting Alberta Party, that is, voted NDP. Now, we have some reasons to potentially doubt this conclusion. We have polling data saying about 10% of UCP voters defected NDP, and the Alberta Party was split 50-50. If we take that, these numbers do theoretically work. If we took 104,000 here and added to this, then we get 724,000. And then if we take 50% of 160, you get roughly the right number. 160 is 172 minus 12,715. You get roughly the right number of NDP voters. However, I don't really think that's what happened. It could have happened, by all means, but I don't think it did. And here is why. So we don't have... One second. Okay, we're back. We don't have a lot of data on this. There's not a lot of polls that had 2019 provincial vote choice broken down. But we can kind of see where this is coming from. Now, keep in mind, this poll slightly underestimated the UCP and slightly overestimates the NDP. It's 50-46. Reality, it's 52-44. What that likely means is this number here, this 13%, is actually overestimated. And this number of 84 is underestimated. That's what I think is happening. They probably have a skewed sample of 2019 UCP voters. And that skewed sample underestimated the UCP and overestimated the NDP defectors. That's what I suspect happened. I can't prove this, and I don't think we will ever know. But you can kind of see where this nugget really creeps in. We have 3%, for example, undecided 2019 UCP voters here. And this is the last poll that broke this down. Though we also have... where is it? Here we go. We also have this Abacus poll, which has it. Where is it? Here we go. And I think this one actually captures it possibly a bit better. So we have this 12% undecided number. A lot of these polls, I think to no fault of the pollster, have just... Actually, Abacus didn't even redistribute this. But when you're looking at the final cross tables, they just move these voters. And if you remove these voters, you're effectively saying they're going to vote proportional to the rest of the population. And that's not necessarily a bad assumption. But when you're talking about something as polarizing as you voted for a party before, I don't think that is a very accurate or realistic assumption. And unfortunately here we don't actually have Alberta Party broken down, and that's one of the issues we have here. We have very few points of 2019 voting data already. We have even fewer with the Alberta Party. It's almost zero. It's really hard to figure out what they did. What those voters did. And there are a large chunk of voters, 172,000 in 2019. That's a lot of voters. So what I think happened here is we have, in the polls, we have systemic overestimation of the NDP in UCP voters because of skewed samples. And we have so few polls, that seems very possible. This Abacus poll here with 18% before you remove undecideds voting NDP from 2019 UCP voters is immense. That would be in the realm of 200,000 voter flip. That didn't even happen. That didn't come close. And you can argue that this poll itself is slightly skewed. What is the final headline number? Oh, look, you did actually have Alberta Party here. Good to know. Probably knew that, just didn't think at the top of my head. But you look here, If we look at committed voters with undecideds out, this is 41 to 51 in this poll. This is right at the height of, what's it called? The vaccine comment controversy. So it's right at the top of that. So keep that with a grain of salt. Don't flame Abacus for this. I don't think David Collette or anyone at Abacus is wrong here. I don't think this poll is representative of the final election, but it also happened on May 11th. So take that with some salt. But this is where we get these artifacts in, and this is where my model causes some misses in Calgary. I suspect here this Alberta Party numbers are skewed in the opposite direction of these UCP numbers. I think the UCP vote is a much stronger retention than forecast, and the Alberta Party vote consolidated more behind the NDP than forecast. Or maybe potentially you could say, going back to... I have too many things open now. Going back to this view, maybe the Alberta Party vote in Edmonton and Calgary consolidated heavily behind the NDP, and the rest of the province went behind the UCP. That's also possible. I will allow that consideration. But I don't think it's very likely. Ooh, sorry about that. Because the UCP didn't really outperform in rural areas. Again, we go back here. No, we don't have that here, but we do have it for this one. We scroll down here by region. Rural's 69 to 63, so let's do a really dumb and naive average and say that's about 66. We look at here, and it's 68 is a real number. So Danielle Smith did outperform in the rurals, sort of, but the NDP wildly did better in the rurals. If we average those the same way and we get like 23, that's 4 points better versus 2 points better. That could easily be explained by the Alberta Party rural voters just not voting anymore. They definitely didn't see 8, 10, and 6 point move to the NDP, to the UCP. And you look in the cities, 34.6 here, and you look here, the final result was 40. Maybe this is just the city. Oh, this is only the city, so this is slightly skewed. Okay. Well, you get the picture, right? It's not clear where these voters moved. But what I think happened is you look especially at Calgary Elbow. I think Calgary Elbow is the really big indicator of this. The Alberta Party voters, and to a lesser extent the Alberta Liberal voters, moved NDP much more strongly than I suspected. And UCP voters didn't defect much. They just stayed home. I think not having exit poll data, not having done any collection myself, just looking at how the results transpired. And I have looked on a deep riding by riding, and in some cases precinct by precinct view. I just don't have that here because it'd be kind of boring and dry. It looks to me the UCP probably only lost about 5% of their voters. And most of the Alberta Party 2019 voters went NDP. That really explains the shift more. That seems easier to accept too, because the idea that the Alberta Party split 50-50, but the UCP has such huge defections to the NDP, kind of beguiles explanation. If the UCP is bleeding so heavily, why is the Alberta Party split 50-50? That seems extremely unlikely to me. But that's what the polls said, and that's what I put in my model. And I suspect, I have not run this. Maybe I should have, but I did not run this. I took this scenario and I mitigated the UCP to NDP defections, but in turn basically made all the Alberta Party voters defect NDP. I think you would probably get this to be almost 100% accurate with that one correction. Probably still miss some seats here and there. I think in the end, we'd probably end up getting Banff-Kanaskas wrong. Still, might get some more Edmonton suburbs wrong. But the general picture is it probably would make the result more accurate. So that seems to be what happened. Because if it makes the model better, and the real data fits that assumption better, that seems more likely what happened. So what does this mean going forward? Well, this means the NDP really has has no affirmative path to victory in 27. In hindsight, I mean, I've been saying this probably since I started the series. They never had a path to victory in this election, an affirmative one, at least. They had a path to victory in the negative sense that the UCP could have screwed up. But they never had an affirmative path to victory. There's nothing the NDP could have done themselves to win outside of just throwing the UCP off their game, confusing them, distracting them, etc. That was their only path. And it didn't happen. Now, this isn't to say Notley or the UCP, or the NDP didn't do well. That's not to say that at all. They did well. They gained 12%, well, they're 11 percentage points of popular vote. That's quite good. They gained a lot of ground. They gained seats. But it's not to say that this was close. That's not to say that this was competitive. That's not to say there is a clear, obvious, or logical path to victory in 27. You're going to see people say, but the 6 marginal ridings that could have went other way. But the story goes the other way. The UCP could have had 55 seats easily tonight. Or, well, a couple weeks ago. And in reality, it's easier to see where this could come from. The NDP gaining seats. The UCP gaining seats, sorry. We look here. Who else are the NDP going to gain vote share from? That's not remotely obvious. Oh, and the other thing I want to mention here. If you look here and look here, about 114,000. You look here, it's about 140,000. That seems related. That doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. Those two numbers. But that is kind of the point here. The NDP came as close as they have in a legitimate election. 2015, well, I'll be clear. I'm not saying 2015 was fraudulent. I'm saying 2015 wasn't a fair contest. The two split parties of the UCP the PCs and the Wild Rose gave the NDP a win. If they combined their vote share, it would have been an easy, comfortable, happy win. I think you only need like 30% of either party's voters defecting, and it's a comfortable, easy win in 2015. Well, losing about 200,000, or about 100,000 of the popular vote, by the way. We look here. What is there to say? It looks like, to me, based on the data we have here, there's probably in the realm of 100,000 provincial conservative voters that the UCP could rally again. And there's not much in the way of third parties the NDP could steal. Let's say they could get all of the somewhat left-wing parties, the Liberals, the Alberta Party, and the Greens. And that's roughly first-order ballpark 31,000. They still lose. That 31,000 is not going to make them win. Might flip a couple seats, maybe. But not really. Not going to change the result meaningfully. Compared to just 114,000 new Conservative voters coming out, and then you get a comfortable win. They will probably win 55 seats range. And there's more than just 114,000 odd voters the Conservatives could turn out. Remember, federally, O'Toole got 1,250,000 voters. O'Toole, who was very unpopular in Alberta. Yes, I'm not going to say Smith is popular, but if Smith governs competently and this province has a good time over the next 4 years, there's no reason to believe that an unpopular federal leader such as O'Toole, his numbers are not achievable. Sure, Kenny didn't do that. But you could also argue, if Kenny didn't screw up during COVID, stayed on and cruised, like if COVID never happened and Kenny just cruised into 23 without any major COVID nonsense happening, he probably would have gained voters. The NDP probably wasn't going to lose voters. In fact, the NDP probably was going to gain voters in 2023 either way. But if COVID didn't happen, the UCP likely would have gained voters themselves. And that's really the story going into 27 here. Yes, it's long away. It's 4 years, blah, 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 blah. A lot can happen. No one predicted COVID in 2019. But barring something world-shattering like COVID and the government response to it, or barring some colossal screw-up on the part of the UCP or something, I don't see a path to victory for the NDP. Especially if, as I suspect, over the next little bit, Notley decides to retire. She's 59. She's not a young woman anymore. Does she really want to contest an election at 63? That's up to her decision. There's nothing stopping her from doing it. I just don't really think she will. And I won't blame her if she doesn't. You can't look at Notley's career and say she was a failure. She actually won a real election, became actually premier. She improved her vote share in the next two elections, her raw votes in 2019 and in 2023. She improved her raw vote total. You can't really fault her. She's done a great job as an NDP leader. No one even expected when she got the office, when she became the leader of the NDP, that she would ever win. Maybe there was a hope with the the PCs and the Wild Rose being split. Maybe there was the hope there. But just because the hope exists doesn't mean it will happen. No one is sitting here thinking, yes, in 2018, Singh had a path to a majority. Because the Liberals and the Conservatives are split, which is kind of what happened in 2015. Not exactly, but close enough. But does that mean she wants to contest again? And if she doesn't contest it again, what does the NDP have? I will not affirmatively say they have no one in their bench. They have no more people to pull in. But it seems very difficult for them to strike silver twice. I say silver specifically because I'm not sure if Notley is gold. I could conceive of a more successful left-wing leader. But while I can conceive of them, that doesn't mean the NDP voter base would actually select them. And I don't think it's entirely their fault. I can conceive a federal conservative leader who would be extremely successful. the base would never select them. Because that leader wouldn't be a conservative anymore. A more successful Notley likely would not be left like an NDPer. It is almost unthinkable. In fact, it's almost unfathomable that Notley herself has managed to stay in power. There are NDPers today, prior to the election, when she looked like she was going to win, who were complaining that she's not left-wing enough. Not as a fringe position, but just as an everyday talking point. That's the untenable position the NDP has in Alberta. They are a really big tent, and the left does not do well with big tents. Now, their really big tent is smaller than the conservative tent, but that's Alberta for you. If we look 20, 30 years from now, the story might be different. But this decade, I'm not thinking it's going to happen. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next Monday with something different.